Nobody wanted to fix the old bus. The words were spoken with the finality of a gravedigger leaning on his shovel. The speaker was a grizzled, grease-stained man named Sal, the owner of a sprawling automotive scrapyard in the sun-bleached plains of eastern New Mexico. He was gesturing at a vehicle that looked less like a bus and more like a beached whale, a colossal wreck slowly surrendering to the forces of nature. It was a 1955 Greyhound Cine-Cruiser, the legendary PD4501 model with its iconic split-level design and panoramic windows. But its glory days were a distant memory. The gleaming, fluted aluminum sides were now dented and oxidized. The paint was a peeling ghost, and the massive wraparound windows were either cracked or clouded with decades of grime. It had been sitting in this same spot for over 20 years, a silent, forgotten titan that every mechanic and restoration shop in a 3-state radius had refused to even touch. But before we explore the secrets hidden within this tomb of forgotten steel, I have to ask, where in the world are you watching this story from? Are you in the United States, maybe somewhere in Europe, or another part of the globe? Drop a comment below and let us know. And tell me this, have you ever seen potential in something that everyone else had declared worthless? Let's build a community that believes in looking for treasure in the trash. The bus was a local legend, a piece of roadside folklore. It had been purchased at a government auction in the late 90s by a hopeful entrepreneur who dreamed of converting it into a luxury motorhome. He had poured his life savings into it, only to be defeated by its immense complexity. The early Cine-Cruisers were notoriously difficult to work on, powered by a pair of Detroit diesel engines, mated together with a complex fluid coupling. When the engines failed, the owner had called every heavy-duty mechanic he could find. They all took one look at the arcane, twin-engine setup and the general state of decay and refused the job. It was too big, too complex, too much of a risk. Defeated and bankrupt, the owner had abandoned it at Sal's scrapyard, where it had sat ever since, a monument to a broken dream. Sal had tried to sell it for scrap, but its historical significance and sheer size made it more trouble than it was worth to cut up. So it sat, a silent testament to a challenge no one was willing to accept. That is, until Jenna Riley arrived. Jenna, at 34, was a master heavy-duty mechanic who ran a small independent mobile repair service. She didn't have a fancy shop. Her entire business operated out of a custom-built service truck that was more of a mobile engineering lab than a simple toolbox. She specialized in the unfixable, vintage commercial vehicles, arcane industrial engines, and complex hydraulic systems. She had heard whispers of the ghost cruiser of Route 66 from other mechanics, a legendary challenge that had defeated everyone. Intrigued, she had driven 300 miles out to Sal's scrapyard to see it for herself. Sal laughed when she told him she was interested in it. "Lady, you don't want that thing. It's cursed. The engines are seized, the wiring is shot, and it's got more rust than a shipwreck. I'll sell it to you for scrap value, $5,000, but you'll be hauling away a nightmare." Jenna walked slowly around the colossal bus, her eyes not seeing the rust and decay, but the beautiful, streamlined design, the incredible engineering challenge. She saw a story. "I'll make you a different deal, Sal," she said, her voice calm and confident. "I'll give you $1,000 for it. Cash. Right now. On one condition. You let me work on it right here, in this yard, for 2 weeks. If I can't get one of its engines to start in 2 weeks, you keep my $1,000 and I'll pay you to haul it to the crusher myself. But if I get it running, I get the title." Sal looked at her, then at the bus, then back at her. He had seen a dozen overconfident men walk away from this same bus. The thought of getting $1,000 for free was too good to pass up. He laughed, spat on the ground, and shook her hand. "Deal. You're crazy, but you're a gambler. I like that. The show starts Monday." The other mechanics in the yard gathered to watch as Jenna began her work the following Monday. They snickered and made bets on how many days it would take for her to give up. They saw a fool's errand. Jenna ignored them. Her first 3 days were not spent with wrenches, but with shovels, brooms, and a pressure washer. She cleared away 2 decades of accumulated dirt, weeds, and animal nests. She cleaned the clouded windows, revealing the stunning panoramic view from the upper deck. She was not just cleaning a vehicle, she was performing an archaeological dig, uncovering the history of the machine. The bus had been a time capsule. Inside, she found old newspapers from 1998, faded road maps, and a child's drawing of the bus tucked into a seat pocket. With the bus finally clean, the true scale of the mechanical challenge was revealed. It was immense. The twin 471 Detroit diesel engines were corroded, their components frozen in place. The wiring was a nightmare of cracked insulation and chewed-up harnesses. The fuel tanks were filled with a thick, tar-like substance that had once been diesel fuel. Any lesser mechanic would have given up at the sight of it. Jenna saw a puzzle, a complex system waiting to be understood and resurrected. She decided to focus on just one of the two engines, the one that was more accessible. For days, she worked with a relentless, methodical patience. She soaked the seized engine cylinders in penetrating oil. She manually turned the engine with a massive 4-foot breaker bar, slowly, patiently, breaking free 27 years of rust and corrosion. She cut away the old, rotted fuel and electrical lines, and just as she had done on so many other hopeless projects, she began to build a new, independent life support system for the engine. She ran new fuel lines from a 5-gallon can of fresh diesel. She wired in a new set of batteries she had brought on her truck. The other mechanics continued to mock her from a distance. "She's wasting her time. That fluid coupling is probably shot. She'll never get the two engines to sync," they'd call out. Jenna just kept working. After a full week of painstaking preparation, she was ready for the first start attempt. She climbed into the dusty driver's seat, took a deep breath and hit the starter. The engine cranked, slow and heavy, the sound of a beast stirring from a long slumber. She gave it a small shot of starting fluid. Cough. Sputter. Then, with a roar of protest and a massive cloud of black smoke that blotted out the sun, the single Detroit diesel engine fired. It was rough, it was loud, it was angry, but it was alive. The mechanics who had been laughing fell. Silent, Sal, the scrapyard owner, just shook his head in disbelief. Jenna let the engine run for a few minutes, listening intently, not just to the sound of the engine, but to the sounds of the bus around it. And that's when she heard it. A strange metallic vibration, a resonance coming from the luggage bay, a noise that was out of sync with the rhythm of the engine. It was a detail no one else would have noticed, a detail that was about to change her life forever. The sound was subtle, almost imperceptible beneath the thunderous roar of the freshly awakened Detroit diesel engine. It was a low-frequency hum, a metallic resonance that seemed to be coming from the main luggage bay, directly under the raised, scenic upper deck. To the other mechanics in the scrapyard, the only sound was the triumphant, if rough, idle of an engine that had been silent for a generation. They heard a victory. Jenna heard a question. The vibration was all wrong. It wasn't the rattle of a loose exhaust hanger or the shudder of a misfiring engine. It was too consistent, too clean. It felt like a hidden machine had just been woken up along with the engine. Intrigued, she shut off the engine, plunging the yard back into a stunned silence. "Did you hear that?" she asked Sal, who was standing nearby, his mouth still slightly agape. Jenna grabbed a flashlight and a pry bar and headed for the main luggage bay. The doors were rusted shut, and it took her 10 minutes of hard labor to force them open. The inside of the bay was dark and musty, filled with old rotted luggage and decaying boxes. It was exactly what you would expect to find in an abandoned bus. She started clearing out the debris, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The floor of the bay was covered in heavy-duty steel panels, but as she cleared away the last of the rotten suitcases, she noticed something odd. One of the panels, at the very back of the bay, was different. It didn't have the same pattern of bolts as the others. The seams around it were too clean, too precise. It looked less like a floor panel and more like a sealed hatch, and when she tapped on it with her pry bar, it made a solid, dull thud, unlike the hollow sound of the other panels. There was something underneath it. Her heart began to beat faster. This was the source of the vibration. She spent the next hour working on the panel. There were no visible bolts or latches. It seemed to be welded shut. Using a grinder from her truck, she carefully began to cut along the clean seam. Sparks flew in the dark bay. The other mechanics, their curiosity now piqued, gathered to watch. They were expecting to find a hidden stash of money or illegal goods, the stuff of scrapyard legends. After an hour of careful cutting, the panel was free. It was incredibly heavy. With the help of Sal and another mechanic, she lifted it away. What lay beneath was not a secret compartment filled with cash. It was something far stranger and far more valuable. Beneath the panel was a second hidden engine bay. And inside that bay, mounted on a beautifully fabricated, custom-made subframe, was an engine unlike anything Jenna had ever seen. It was not a diesel. It was not a gasoline engine. It was a compact, cylindrical machine that looked more like a jet engine than a car engine. A complex array of polished stainless steel pipes, wires, and strange finned coolers surrounded it. It was connected via a complex gearbox to the bus's main drive shaft. Tucked in a corner of the hidden bay was a small welded steel box. Jenna pried it open. Inside, protected by a wax-sealed canvas wrap, was a set of leather-bound journals and a roll of meticulously hand-drawn blueprints. The blueprints were dated from 1955. On the title block of each page were 2 words, Project Prometheus. The journals belonged to a man named Dr. Alistair Finch, an engineer Jenna had only read about in obscure history books. Finch was a certified genius, a visionary engineer who had worked for all the major auto manufacturers in the 1950s before abruptly disappearing in the late 1950s after a bitter falling out over the future of engine technology. He was a man who believed the automotive world had taken a wrong turn with the internal combustion engine. Jenna unrolled the blueprints on the dusty floor of the luggage bay, the other mechanics crowding around to see. The drawings detailed the engine before them, a revolutionary, multi-stage, regenerative gas turbine engine. According to Finch's notes, it was designed to be incredibly efficient, capable of running on almost any flammable liquid, diesel, gasoline, kerosene, even vegetable oil. It was lighter, had fewer moving parts, and produced almost zero vibration compared to a piston engine. The technology detailed in the blueprints was staggering, decades ahead of its time. It incorporated ideas for ceramic turbine blades and regenerative heat exchangers that modern engineers were only just beginning to experiment with. The bus, she realized, had not been a simple passenger coach. It had been Alistair Finch's secret, mobile laboratory. He had taken the 2 original diesel engines out and replaced them with one of his own creation. The second engine that had powered the bus's accessories and air conditioning was what Jenna had started. That engine's sole purpose was to act as a starter, motor, and generator for the main event, the Prometheus turbine. The strange vibration she had heard was the turbine's internal components being spun by the accessory engine, a sound no one else had recognized because no one else knew it was there. The journals told the rest of the story. Finch had been developing his turbine engine in secret, convinced that the auto industry, with its massive investment in piston engine technology, would try to suppress his invention. The bus was his escape, his proof of concept. He planned to drive it across the country, demonstrating its capabilities, and reveal his creation to the world on his own terms. But he had never made it. The last entry in the journal was from 1998. It detailed a minor failure in a fuel control unit, a problem he could fix, but it was followed by a more ominous note about his declining health. He had parked the bus, his life's work hidden within, and had likely passed away before he could complete his journey. The bus, along with his revolutionary invention, had been lost to time, sitting in a scrapyard, mistaken for just another piece of junk. Jenna stood up, looking at the incredible machine nestled in its secret compartment. She looked at the priceless blueprints. She looked at Sal, the scrapyard owner, who was staring at the turbine engine with a look of complete and utter confusion. She had a choice to make. Her deal with Sal was that if she could get an engine started, the bus was hers. She had fulfilled her end of the bargain. She could quietly take her discovery, sell the blueprints to an automotive or aerospace company, and become an instant millionaire. No one would ever know. But as she looked at Alistair Finch's elegant handwriting in his journals, at the passion and genius evident on every page, she felt a profound sense of responsibility. This wasn't just a discovery, it was an inheritance. Selling it off to a corporation felt like a betrayal of the spirit of the man who had created it. She made a decision. She would not just claim the discovery. She would finish the journey. "Sal," she said, her voice steady, "the bus is mine, but I'm going to need to rent this corner of your yard for a little while longer. The real work is just beginning." Sal, who was now beginning to understand that he had just sold a lottery ticket for $1,000, simply nodded, too stunned to argue. The next few months were a blur of intense, obsessive work. Jenna lived and breathed Project Prometheus. Alistair Finch's journals became her Bible. The engine was a masterpiece, but it was also a prototype with dozens of undocumented features and strange quirks. She spent weeks just deciphering his notes, reverse engineering his control systems, and fabricating parts that no longer existed. She used her own money, the profits from her mobile repair business, to fund the project. She bought a TIG welder, a small lathe, and other fabrication tools. The other mechanics, who had once mocked her, now watched her with a mixture of awe and respect. They would bring her coffee, offer to help clean parts, just to be near the project, to be a small part of the incredible story unfolding in their dusty yard. Jenna was no longer just fixing a bus. She was resurrecting a dream. She was becoming the custodian of a lost legacy. The most difficult part was the fuel control unit, the very component that had failed on Finch back in 1998. It was a complex, purely mechanical device, a marvel of miniature springs, valves, and diaphragms. No modern equivalent existed. She had to completely disassemble it, diagnose its failure, a ruptured diaphragm, and then fabricate a new diaphragm by hand from a modern, fuel-resistant polymer. It was a task that required the skill of a watchmaker and the knowledge of a materials scientist. But after a month of painstaking work, she succeeded. The day Jenna finally attempted to start the Prometheus turbine was a quiet, tense affair. There was no crowd, just Jenna, Sal, and a few of the scrapyard mechanics who had become her acolytes. Following the sequence laid out in Finch's journal, she first started the small Detroit diesel engine. It rumbled to life, its power now being used not to move the bus, but to spin up a generator and a hydraulic pump. For 10 minutes, the diesel engine charged a bank of high-capacity capacitors and built up immense pressure in a hydraulic accumulator. The Prometheus engine didn't have a conventional starter. It used a blast of high-pressure hydraulic fluid to spin the turbine up to its ignition speed of 15,000 RPM. This was the moment of truth. Jenna took a deep breath and flipped a large, unlabeled switch on the custom control panel she had rebuilt. A loud hiss filled the air as the hydraulic fluid was released, followed by a sound that started as a low whistle and quickly climbed in pitch higher and higher until it became a smooth, clean, powerful shriek, the sound of a jet engine. At 15,000 RPM, the ignition system fired. There was a soft whoomph as the fuel ignited in the combustion chamber, and the sound changed. It was no longer a whistle, it was a roar, a smooth, continuous, vibration-free roar of immense power. The Prometheus turbine was running. The light on her control panel glowed a steady green. The temperature and pressure readings were all perfectly stable. It worked. The lost engine, the dream of a forgotten genius, was alive. The small group of mechanics stood in stunned silence, listening to a sound that no one on Earth had heard. In over a quarter of a century, news of what was happening in Sal's dusty scrapyard began to travel through the close-knit world of vintage vehicle restorers and automotive historians. A professor of automotive history from a university in California, who had written a book on forgotten automotive engineers, heard the rumor and drove out to New Mexico, certain it was a hoax. When Jenna showed him Finch's journals, the blueprints, and then started the turbine engine for him, the professor was left speechless and tearful. He authenticated the discovery on the spot. It was, he said, the single most important discovery of a lost automotive technology in the last 50 years. The story exploded. Automotive magazines, engineering journals, and eventually mainstream news outlets descended on the small scrapyard. The Ghost Cruiser, once a local legend, was now an international sensation. The world's largest automotive and aerospace companies also took notice. Within weeks, Jenna was fielding offers. A representative from a major German automaker offered her $5 million for the bus and all the intellectual property. A Japanese company offered $7 million. An American aerospace giant, seeing the potential of the compact, efficient turbine for use in aircraft, offered a staggering $10 million. Jenna, the small-town mobile mechanic who had been living paycheck to paycheck, was suddenly in a position of incredible power. Sal, the scrapyard owner, could only watch in stunned disbelief, replaying the moment he had shaken her hand on a $1,000 bet. But Jenna didn't take the easy money. She thought about Alistair Finch, the lonely genius who had poured his life into this machine, betrayed by the very industry he had tried to revolutionize. Selling his life's work to the highest bidder felt like a second betrayal. She turned down the multi-million-dollar offers. Instead, she contacted a young, forward-thinking electric vehicle startup, a company that was known for its innovative engineering culture, not its corporate bureaucracy. She proposed a different kind of deal. She wouldn't sell the technology. She would license it. She formed her own company, Prometheus Propulsion Labs, and structured a landmark deal. The startup would get exclusive rights to develop and commercialize the turbine technology, which they planned to use as a hyper-efficient range extender for their electric trucks. In return, Jenner would receive a significant equity stake in the company, a multi-million-dollar budget to build a state-of-the-art research facility, and, most importantly, she would retain full creative and engineering control over the development of the Prometheus engine. She would ensure Finch's vision was realized correctly. The deal made her a millionaire many times over, not in cash, but in equity and assets. Her net worth was suddenly tied to the success of the very technology she had resurrected. She moved out of Sal's scrapyard and established her new research facility in a large modern building in Albuquerque. She hired a small elite team of engineers and fabricators, including several of the young mechanics from the scrapyard who had helped her. Her first project was the complete frame-off restoration of the Cinecruiser. It was no longer just a bus, it was a priceless piece of automotive history, the world's only working prototype of Finch's genius. The restoration was done to a standard that would have made Arthur Vance weep. When it was finished, the bus was a gleaming masterpiece, its iconic 1950s design now powered by a futuristic turbine heart. The bus, now christened the Prometheus, made its public debut at the Jay Leno's Garage Show, where its incredible story and revolutionary engine captivated a global audience. The EV startup she had partnered with unveiled their first prototype truck featuring a compact Prometheus turbine range extender a year later. It was a massive success, doubling the range of their electric semi-trucks and solving the biggest obstacle to long-haul electric transportation. The company's values skyrocketed, and so did Jenner's. She became a titan of the industry, a celebrated inventor and entrepreneur, but she never forgot where she came from. She established a foundation funded by her newfound wealth, dedicated to providing scholarships and grants to independent mechanics and inventors, the kind of people who, like her, saw treasure where others only saw trash. The old forgotten bus, the cursed relic that nobody wanted, had not only made her a millionaire, but had sparked a revolution in engine technology. A revolution that had been waiting patiently in the dark for 27 years, waiting for someone to finally come along who was willing to listen. So, as we finish this story, I ask you one final time, where are you watching from? What forgotten dream or lost piece of history have you stumbled upon? Let me know in the comments below. Because Jenner Riley proved that the greatest treasures aren't always buried in the ground. Sometimes they're sitting in plain sight, covered in dust, dismissed as junk, just waiting for one person with the courage, the skill, and the heart to turn the key and bring them back to life. Let's build a community that believes in resurrection. Together.